When I was 8 years old, for whatever reason, my family abruptly ended all religious practice and affiliation. I don't know why, but suddenly there was no Catholic school, no catechism, confirmations, or Sunday Mass. When I asked my mother, what would our beliefs be then? Her answer, her great gift to me, was to say that that was up to me to determine. Fortunate to grow up in an area rich in the natural sciences here on Long Island, I played as a boy on the beaches, in the bays, the rivers, and the ocean, learning about the complexity of the environment significantly shaped my approach to life. Recently, a friend had mentioned to me that I had mentioned to him that I wasn't spiritual or wasn't religious, but he pointed out to me that he thought my spirituality was as strong as it was with anyone he knew, and that connectivity to the environment was my spirituality. Yet, as I matured, and typical of many of my conflicting interests, I've long struggled with a paradox: how to reconcile my growing electrical manufacturing and distribution business that was energy and resource intensive, and yet still consider myself to be environmentally progressive. In the 1970s and 80s, corporations often viewed environmental regulations as costly and unnecessary, and justifiably, business was often vilified as being the root cause of many of the problems. So back then, as a contributor to a number of environmental groups, sometimes I felt a little out of place as a conservative business owner when attending their events. So I was looking for a new approach, one that could bridge the gap with business, be productive and not antagonistic. While researching the many wonderful groups out there, one in particular stood out: the Environmental Defense Fund. EDF's mission was to develop economic solutions to the most pressing environmental problems, to work with business and not against it. There were many in the movement that were very suspicious of this approach, concerned that the core beliefs might be compromised. But I met with the executive team. They were all dressed in business suits. Most had Ivy League degrees in business law and science. And the programs that they proposed were based on science, but grounded in economics, where there were financial incentives and not penalties. Their goal was to have business be the driver of environmental solutions. This was something that appealed to both sides of my interests. So, over the years, I've seen progress and growth that has unleashed the potential of business. An early example was a partnership with McDonald's, where over 40 different actions were developed to reduce packaging, to increase the recycled content of items, and to create new markets for recycled goods, all while saving millions in reduced packaging and trash pickup costs. An early outcome, one of the great outcomes, I should say, of that partnership was the elimination of these styrofoam sandwich containers. Another early initiative was the development of the cap and trade program that so dramatically slashed emissions and acid rain in the early 1990s at a fraction of the projected cost, in a win-win for the environment, the utilities, and human health. This concept is now the basis for the successful cap and trade programs in place in California, the European Union, 9 northeastern states, and now many provinces in China. Another pioneering effort was the development of the Catch Share program, which has transformed fisheries and fishing communities around the world by ensuring that all stakeholders have a vested interest in the rebound and successful management of fish stocks. Today, over 65% of all fish landed by U.S. commercial fishermen are under catch share management, as both the financial sustainability of the fishing industry and the environmental sustainability of our oceans both win. Over time, this economics-based approach began to attract a number of business partners that included UPS, FedEx, KKR, Starbucks, and many others. Three rules governed these business partnerships. One, that there were long-term measurable environmental gains. Two, that there were long-term financial gains that assured long-term adoption. And that three, the model was replicable for others in that industry. In the McDonald's instance, similar innovations were adopted by Burger King and others. But the theme of today's talk is disruption, helping individual companies improve their bottom lines while reducing their environmental impacts is helpful but not particularly disruptive. What would be disruptive? What could be so powerfully important as a change agent as to warrant inclusion in these talks? With annual revenues approaching $500 billion, Walmart alone is the world's 25th largest economy, ahead of the GDP of 157 other nations. As China's 8th largest trading partner, Walmart is the world's largest grocer, the #1 seller of toys, furniture, and jewelry, among other items. They do more business than Sears, Target, Kroger's, Safeway, JCPenney, and Kmart combined. Not only are they the world's largest retailer, they are also the world's largest customer, with over 100,000 companies in their supply chain. Now, it's important to recognize the significant criticisms that Walmart has experienced over the years. I do understand that, but it's also important to recognize the great potential of this company to affect change through its vast supply chain. When Walmart speaks, its suppliers listen. Who knows, and maybe even because of some of these criticisms, but in 2005, then Walmart CEO Lee Scott agreed to meet with EDF President Fred Krupp to discuss opportunities between the organizations. After a trip together to Mount Washington, where they witnessed firsthand the impacts of climate change, Walmart agreed to a series of programs and incentives to reduce their net operational carbon footprint, all while providing an economic benefit to the company. Among some of the initial changes were some that were quite simple, such as simply having trucks turn off their diesel engines when loading and unloading. Easy enough, but because of the scale that was involved, thousands of tons of emissions were avoided. In 2007, Walmart launched a retail program to sell 100 million compact fluorescent lamps, helping to drive adoption of these energy-saving lamps into the mainstream. A plan was developed to decrease plastic shopping bag waste by 33%. When you use 9 billion plastic shopping bags, that's a huge reduction in waste. Enough so that if you were to lay these bags end to end, they would go to the moon and back 10 times. At that point, Walmart recognized the economic value of good environmental practices and sought to work more closely. As a longtime contributor to their corporate partnerships program, I supported the placement of 2 full-time EDF staff directly into the Bentonville, Arkansas headquarters to exclusively advise Walmart on how to set and achieve these 4 transformational goals. The first was to address climate change. With the requirement to cut a combined 20 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions from its own operations as well as throughout its supply chain, Walmart is forcing its suppliers to improve their factory efficiencies, to reduce packaging, to increase the recycled content and recyclability of products, and to offer its customers more products that save energy and water. Reducing water and climate pollution in agriculture. A dramatic reduction in greenhouse gas emissions will be achieved through a reduction in fertilizer use. Remarkably, half of the total supply chain emissions are associated with fertilizer use. Since Walmart's principal business is now grocery, they are forcing 15 major food producers to go through their agricultural supply chains to reduce fertilizer use and cut emissions by an additional 7 million metric tons by 2020. In addition to lower costs and lower emissions, less fertilizer use also means less pollution runoff that ends up in our waterways and that seriously degrades ecosystems like the Mississippi Delta pictured here. Alarmingly, there has been no mandated improvement in chemical safety in over 40 years. There are virtually no protections from the over 80,000 chemicals that are routinely used in our food, in our cosmetics, and in our household products. In many ways, we are all unwitting participants in an ongoing experiment in how chemicals affect our bodies and the environment. As such, Walmart has implemented a policy that will identify and eliminate a priority list of hazardous chemicals, one of which, as an example, is formaldehyde, which is often found in detergents, cleaning products, and even our shampoos. The market is responding, and companies such as Johnson & Johnson and Colgate-Palmolive have already announced they are phasing out these problematic chemicals. The fourth is to scale these innovations, and as such, Walmart has come up with 3 specific initiatives that will transform their supply chain. The first is the creation of the Sustainability Consortium, which is a group of over 90 large retailers and suppliers that are building agreement on the metrics and definitions of what constitute sustainability in a product, not just for Walmart, but for all retailers. The second was the development of a sustainability index, which is a scorecard that rates products on their environmental impacts and sustainability. Now, price alone is no longer the sole determinant in a purchasing decision. This index score now becomes an important consideration. The third was the launching this past year of the Product Sustainability Expo, which is a large trade show where many of the world's largest companies will come and make commitments on sustainability and improved environmental practices. This selfie was taken at this year's inaugural Expo, and it includes the CEOs of Kellogg's, Walmart, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, Monsanto, Pepsi, and Campbell's. Now, there are a great many details and challenges associated with all of these initiatives, but the bottom line is that Walmart is forcing disruption and change throughout its entire supply chain. And as a consequence, those vendors are forcing disruption and change throughout their supply chain. Now, companies around the world will need to compete on the sustainable attributes of their products, much as they have on price, in a race to the top for environmental value in Walmart's global supply chain. It's clear that we're entering a new era of business, one that places economic value on good environmental practice. When you take all of this into account, you can see that as a focal point for forcing disruption and creating change for the benefit of human health and the environment, Bentonville, Arkansas may be as important as Washington, D.C. So I've learned it is possible to reconcile my conflicting interests. The world may be polarized, but that's a false choice. Disruption is about forcing change. Environmental stewardship and business development are no longer either or. They are and they can be and.
Thank you.